Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first of Beach Expert Talk series. We are happy to have with us Dr. Bala to give his talk on the EIA, but 35 years of EIA in Malaysia and what is next. To give the talk today is Dr. Bala, who is the Managing Director of ERE Consulting Group, a member of the Orcon Group. He has 35 years of consulting experience in a wide range of sectors from infrastructure, biodiversity, transportation, energy, and water resources, and has served as an advisor to a wide range of government agencies, private sector, and non-governmental organizations across Malaysia, Asia. It has been 35 years since EIAs were made mandatory in Malaysia. While the EIA process has undergone numerous changes and improvements over the past 35 years, weaknesses and multiple challenges remain to be addressed. Dr. Bala will be touching on several aspects on the EIA. And we now are happy to pass the session over to Dr. Bala.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Leela, and good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you, Leela, and for inviting me. You mentioned EIA being 35 years. So 35 years is actually when I first graduated. And by chance, my first job was as a technician in an EIA project. So in Sabah, 35 years ago. And since then, I've been involved in various EIA assignments, including helping government to formulate guidelines and policies in the matter, and also multiple projects. So today, I'm just going to share with you some of my thoughts, and also to correct some of the common misconceptions about EIA. So feel free to ask questions either towards the end or in the chat box, and I'll try to answer them as the best I can. So I'll share my screen now. So 35 years, what next, right? So the EIA was enforced in Malaysia in 1988, and then Sabah and Sarawak also introduced their state legislation in 94 and 1999, respectively. So in Peninsular Malaysia, only the EIA, Environmental Quality Act applies, but in Sabah and Sarawak, the Environmental Quality Act as well as the state legislation apply, right? So far, my guess, I tend to be corrected. I think in Malaysia, we have probably done about 9,000, perhaps close to 10,000 EIAs over the 35 years. And that's a lot of EIAs. And of course, over the last 35 years, we had numerous seminars and meetings and trainings and guidelines, all sorts of things on EIAs. And of course, we had also a lot of headaches. Just for your information, in the coming years, as part of the Malaysia Agreement 1963, the EQA might not be applicable in Sabah and Sarawak in the years to come. This is part of the delegation of powers from the federal government to Sabah and Sarawak state. This is just for your information. It might not happen today, but it's just a matter of time before that happens. But of course, despite all the 9,000 or 10,000 EIAs in 35 years, we still have a lot of environmental problems, right? We have the haze, you have road kills, illegal disposal of waste, massive land clearings, and so on. And the problems, the list goes on and on. Road kills, forest fires, flooding, toxic waste dumps, and so on. So obviously, even today, most of you will agree there are still a lot of environmental problems. While we have made a lot of progress in terms of legislation and environmental protection, the problems have not gone away. But the question later that we will discuss is, the problems that we see, are they because we are not doing the EIA properly? Can the better EIA prevent these problems? Or are we simply barking up the wrong tree? because EIA is a popular topic, right? So any environmental problem, everybody says, oh, it's because there's no EIA or EIA done badly. So every problem tends to be linked to EIAs. So, but my question to you all later, not now, is can a perfect EIA system overcome these problems, or do the problems lie elsewhere and that we are simply barking up the wrong tree? Okay, we'll come to that in a short while. Right. So what I'll try to cover today is, one is the real purpose of the EIA, which is, I think, is very important. And I think if we can understand the real purpose of EIA, then it allows us to articulate solutions better, right? And also, what is the difference between the EIA process and the report itself? Everybody is familiar with the report, but not many people are familiar with the process. What are the common misconceptions, the role of consultants, and how can we make the EIA better, right? So when I prepared this presentation, initially my understanding, and I think the organizers, because this talk was targeted towards CSOs or NGOs. So that's how I prepared my presentation, mainly assuming CSOs were my target audience, but we understand today there are lots more people, including from government and private sector. So that's fine, but I'll see how best I can explain these things to you. Okay, very basic question. What exactly is the EIA? It's strange to ask this question after 35 years of EIA, but a question which is, I think, fundamental to our discussion today, because if you cannot truly appreciate what is an EIA, we cannot articulate our solutions. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time explaining what exactly is the EIA, right? So you bear with me. So in a lot of people's mind, when you hear EIA or you hear EIA report, their understanding is, so there's this guy in the lab coat that goes around looking at the project and then writes a report saying, oh, there are a lot of impacts, not much impact, it's a good project, it's a bad project, the project should proceed or project should not proceed. He writes a report and submits it to DOE. So that is how a lot of people perceive the EIA, that someone goes, looks at a project and writes a report and submit to the government. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions of EIA. And because of this misconception, a lot of the solution proposed, a lot of the frustration among the community, among NGOs and all that is tied down to basically we have different expectation of the EIA. And because all of us look at it differently, sometimes it's like the five blind men and the elephant. People look at EIAs differently. And if we don't understand what the EIA is meant to do, what is its true spirit behind the EIA, we'll never be able to bridge the gaps and the problems within the system, right? So as I will explain later on, the EIA is not about somebody going around writing a report about a project, right? So this is not true. So if you have this assumption, please leave the assumptions elsewhere. And I think one of the reasons why people have misconception about the EIA is because of the term EIA itself. The EIA stands for Environmental Impact Assessment, and therefore, most people assume it is about impact assessment only. But the reality is, while impact assessment is an important part of the EIA, it's only a small part of the entire EIA process. And therefore, I can understand why people might get misled, because the term says EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment, so most people think, this is about assessing impacts. But the reality is EIA is about assessing impact, but it's only a small part of the EIA process. And there are many other things that are done as part of the EIA, right? So that is my impact assessment. Assessing the impacts is only a small part of the EIA. Okay, now let's get back to basics now. We need to understand the context in the context of sustainable development. Malaysia's population will grow, right? I think all of you all aware this, that by 2050, we'll have about 46 million people in this country. So that is a growth of about 12 million people over the next 20-25 years. So, in Malaysia, by 2050, there'll be 12 million additional people living in Malaysia. 12 million is a big number. Of course, not as big as some other countries. Like, for example, Indonesia, between now and 2050, I think we'll expect at least 100 million more people living there, right? So Malaysia, 12 million more people. So what does 12 million people really mean? Between now and 2050, there'll be 12 million people net. The babies are born, people die, by net, there'll be 12 million more people. What does 12 million people really mean? We will need 3 million new homes. We'll need about 200 new schools. We'll need about 6 million jobs. I don't know how many kilometers of new roads. How much more for food production? How much more power plants that we need? How many more new dams because they need to provide water? Oh, people need to go holidays, so there'll be new resorts, there'll be new factories and so on. So 12 million people is given. I don't think we can change that, right? Unless you think government should introduce a policy like no more new babies, then we can change it. Otherwise, we have to live with this 12 million. And in order to cater for 12 million, there'll be a lot more new development coming up in the years to come, right? So in the context of sustainable development, we have to develop our national economy because of the growing population and because we want to increase quality of life. But at the same time, I think we all can agree that we need to safeguard our environment and our communities against the potential impact of these economic activities. So we need to develop our country to cater for the increasing population and the need to increase the quality of life. But at the same time, we need to safeguard our environment and communities, right, from the impacts of these economic activities. So this is fundamentally sustainable development, right? So I'm explaining this because this is very important to understand the context of EIA later on. So when we take an economic activity, so in pursuit of sustainable development, as the country grows, there'll be economic activities. There'll be roads built, there'll be housing schemes, there'll be power plants, there'll be dams, there'll be resort, and so on. So the person who's promoting this activity, let's call that person a project proponent, a person who's proposing that activity. And there'll be many of these. So this person who's promoting the economic activity, be it road or power station or a housing project or factory, so on, he or she is guided by a few things. So in an economic activity, let's say this is a private developer, right? So the developer is, of course, they are guided by their business plan. This private company, they want to make some money. They need to make sure that whatever investment they're putting in the project has returns. So they need to recover, say, 10% profit or whatever. They have their own shareholders mandate. They're also guided by national policy strategies. They need to abide by laws and regulation. And they also need to ensure governance, take into account needs of their stakeholders, and so on. So any project that somebody is proposing is sort of guided by these factors. And I've highlighted national policy and strategy in yellow because that's very important, because every project that is proposed in this country or anywhere else is rarely a standalone project. That means nobody gets up in the morning, I got nothing to do, let's build a road. It doesn't happen that way, right? So every road that is built or planned is part of a larger master plan of a road network in Malaysia. So similarly, every power station that's built, and nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I got nothing to do, I'm going to build a power station. it doesn't happen that way, because every power station built is always a subset, is linked to a national energy policy, for example, or national electricity plan, which sets out that we need so much electricity by X number of years, and we need to ensure a good fuel mix. So it's always linked to a national policy. So this is what guides a project proponent. And of course, project proponent, in order to implement his or her project, is then supported by his engineers, consultants, planners, bankers, contractors, lawyers, whoever not. So all these people help the project proponent to implement an economic activity, which is then guided by all the above factors. Right. So I'm trying to present this in a simple manner as possible so that you understand how an economic activity flows. On the other hand, in terms of environment and social safeguards, the government is the main steward. The government has the primary responsibility for this. Of course, government has got other responsibilities as well, defense, education, health, blah, blah, blah. But in environment, social safeguard, the government is the primary custodian and responsible for the safeguard. And the government, in safeguarding the environment and society, is also guided by national vision, laws and regulation, public interest, national priorities, policies and plan, international obligation, and so on. And the government is supported by the entire civil service. They have advisors, they have the public budget, they have the courts. So if you don't follow, we can charge you in court. They have licensing, they can issue license, they can withdraw license, they have incentives, and so on. So all this enables government to safeguard the environment and our society. So when put together, the pursuit of economic activity needs to be in balance with safeguarding the environment and community. So this is theoretically a balance. Of course, in real life, it might not be. But so this is the balance we are looking at. Every economic activity must be counterbalanced by environmental and social safeguards. Okay. Now, so when this project proponent is proposing a project and government needs to safeguard, the government needs to safeguard. So when in evaluating whether any project is acceptable or not, 3 criteria need to be fulfilled, right? The first, any project proposed must be in line with national policies and laws, including statutory plans and so on. So if a project is not in line with national policies or legislation or national plans, it should not be approved. Right? For example, if the structure plan says that area is gazetted as a public green space, if somebody is proposing a power station there, obviously it cannot be approved, right? But of course, in reality, things happen differently. But this is the basic assumption that any project proposed must be in line with national policies and laws and plans. Number 2, we all know that every project has benefits to society and every project has cost to the society. Everything we do has benefits and costs. Even the webinar today has cost. We all use electricity, so there's a cost to society, right? But the important thing is the benefits to the society must always be larger than the cost to society, right? And the last point is adverse impacts from any project must be reduced to acceptable levels, because every project has impacts. There's no such thing as zero impacts, right? Every project, everything we do has impacts, right? There's no such thing as zero impacts. I think we need to get that clear. There's no such thing as zero impacts. So because every project has impacts, we need to make sure that adverse impacts from any projects are reduced to acceptable levels. And what is acceptable level? That's again another gray area. In some cases, like for example, if somebody has a factory, they have to make sure that whatever goes out from the chimney meets the air quality standards. So that is in a simple way to say that air quality impacts have been reduced to acceptable levels, or if they have a effluent coming out from their plant and they need to reduce that to meet the DOE standards, for example. So that is acceptable. But in other cases, when we talk about flora and fauna or social impacts, this becomes a bit more difficult to assess, right? And that's where government needs to use its own judgment to make decisions. So when we talk about this balance, which I explained earlier, in proposing an economic activity and trying to safeguard the environment and society, the project proponent in proposing his activity has to demonstrate that his project is in line with national policies, laws, and guidelines. His project's benefits to society are greater than the cost to the society, and that he has reduced the adverse impact to acceptable level. So project proponent needs to demonstrate this to the government, because he's asking for approval and the government gives approval. The government can only give approval if the government is convinced of the same. The government must be convinced that the project is in line with national policies, laws, and guidelines. The benefits of the project to the society are greater than the cost, and the adverse impacts have been reduced to acceptable levels. So this is a very simple case where a party wants to do an economic activity and is seeking approval from the government. And in seeking the approval, they need to demonstrate these three items. And the government, in granting approval, must be convinced that the three criteria have been met. If it's not met, then you cannot give approval, right? So, as I said, the project proponent's responsibility in promoting any of his project is they have to demonstrate these three things. Project is in line with national policy, laws, and guidelines. The benefits are greater than the cost, and adverse impacts have been reduced to acceptable levels. So in order to demonstrate this, the project proponent has a long list of things that he or she has to do in order to demonstrate this. This is a sample of stuff that they need to do and submit to the government in order to be able to demonstrate the three items, right? For example, the project might have erosion. So in order to demonstrate that the adverse soil erosion impacts have been reduced to acceptable levels, then the project proponent has to prepare and design an erosion sediment control plan and submit this to the government for approval. So same with all the others, and this is only a sample, but there are a lot more, right? So in order to get approval, a project proponent needs to submit tons of documents and reports and designs and plans to demonstrate that he meets these three criteria. EIA is just one of them. I think it's very important for you guys to remember that EIA is just one out of the many submissions that the project proponent has to make. And then they submit this for approval. Unfortunately, for most of us, only the EIA is accessible, or it's at least accessible to the public to read. None of the other documents are. And that's very important because none of the other documents are accessible to the public. So everybody jumps on the EIA and hoping to find answers in the EIA, whereas EIA has a different purpose, might not offer you all the answers. So when people don't find the answers in the EIA, they get frustrated and they say the EIA is not complete and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is project proponent has to make numerous other submissions, and unfortunately, these are not available to the public. So one of the things I'm suggesting that to those of you who are in the NGOs and all that one of the things that you should champion is to get all other documents accessible to the public so that you don't have to rely on the EIA only, right? So to the EIAs and Department of Environment's credit, they are, until today, they are only department that makes available report to the public. None of their other submissions are made public. So yeah, so in a way it works, it backfires against the Department of Environment because they are the only one who make it public. and everybody harps on the report, and they have to face pressure from the public. But I think it's also important that we pursue the idea that any submission should also be made public, not only the EIA. So now let me go back to EIA as a project planning tool, right? So remember, the project proponent has to demonstrate all this stuff. So in planning and designing her project, the project proponent gets a team of engineers, consultants, planners, architects, and so on to help them plan the project better, because the project needs to meet with these three criteria, right? Project proponent they do not have the necessary technical knowledge to do it, so they engage a bunch of experts, engineers, planners, consultants, and so on. And EIA is one of them, and not the only, but one of them, because you got engineering design to be done, you got layout planning to be done, you got traffic planning to be done, you got drainage planning to be done, you got 101 different things needs to be done. EIA is one of them. So in the project planning, the role of the EIA or whoever is working on the EIA is to make sure that whatever you do, because you'll do your baseline data collection, you'll do computer simulation, you'll do prediction, you do assessment, you'll get feedback from the community, you'll get so on. The purpose of doing all that is actually, how can you make the project better? How can the project be designed so that the impacts can be reduced? How can we maximize benefit to the society? So it's all about planning, project planning. But because this is not visible, because this is internal process between the project proponent and his team of advisors, most of us don't see this. If you're not being involved, you don't see this, right? All you see is when the report comes out later on. So the background, behind the scene work that could take years is how all these findings of the environmental assessment, traffic assessment, social assessment, soil investigation, whatnot, are used to fine-tune the project so that the project is more presentable, impacts have been reduced, benefits are enhanced, and it complies with all laws and legislation. So to the project proponent, the EIA, like all the other processes, is a tool that helps him to plan the project, to make the project better, right? Only once all the planning is done, the EIA documents that and is submitted for approval. And I think you need to, this is very important, right? Because most of you only see the EIA report. You don't get to see the process behind it. So, and therefore, a lot of people assume there's somebody sitting in the corner writing a report and submitting to DOE, but that's never the case, right? So I want to show you examples how the EIA is a project planning tool. I'll just show you some quick examples. Let's take an example of a road. Yeah, I'm just giving road. So initially the red line, you can see the red line is what was proposed by the engineers where the road should go, right? But the moment the environmental and social experts start working on the project, they do their field work, they do the surveys, they do the community engagement, and they think that the rate alignment, this part, might actually create a lot of environmental issues. So they work together with the engineers. They say, why can we change the road? Instead of the red one, can we bring it down south so that we avoid maybe certain kampongs or certain orang asli villages and so on. And this process of adjusting and redesigning and realignment goes on and on until we come up with a road design which is the most optimum. I mean, it tries to balance the environmental issues with cost, with social issues, with land acquisition, with achieving the required engineering geometry, achieving the traffic volumes, achieving government policies, so on. So so they look at many things as part of the EIA, right? Which alignment is the best? Can we adjust the alignment? Which design is, can we, instead of at grade, can we introduce a tunnel here to reduce the impacts on that particular forest? Can we use different construction methods? So if it's a very sensitive area, maybe you don't want to use heavy machinery, you might use light machinery. There are compensations, so maybe there are villages who need compensation, but compensation can come in many ways. So this is all part of project planning, which is EIA is integral part of, right? Only after the project has been optimized, the report is submitted for approval. The project proponent submits the report for approval based on the optimized project design, hoping that the government will give approval. Remember, the report is never based on the original alignment, because when we start a project, it's always the first design. The report is never based on, the report is always based on the final project design that has been optimized, taking into account of the environmental issues, social issues, traffic, soil, whatever. This is one example. Let me give another example. If somebody is planning to build a factory, the EIA doesn't go stand in the corner and write report, oh, this is a good factory or bad factory. That's not how it's done. So as part of the factory planning and design, the environmental expert who's engaged by the project proponent looks at the design and says, your chimney is now 40 meters. Based on my simulation, 40 meters is not tall enough because the air pollution will still be high. So you need to increase it to 45 meters. So the engineers, maybe they redesign to 45 meters. So you run the computer model again. At 45 meters, still not good enough. You need to increase it to 47 meters. And at 47 meters, okay, 47 meters is high enough to reduce the emission. You can change the location of the stack. Instead of being in the corner of the land, let's move it to the center so that we create greater buffer zone. We can change, as part of the environmental assessment, we can look at the filter types, we can look at the process design, and so on. So the EIA for the project proponent becomes a tool to help to reduce the project impacts, right? Only after the project has been redesigned, the report is submitted for approval. I always remember, it's not somebody standing in the corner writing a report about somebody's proposal. So it's about working together with the entire design team, is to reduce the impacts of the project, is to make the project better. I want to give you another example, which is, I think everybody is familiar. Let's take the East Coast Rail Link, for example. ECRL has appeared in the papers many times. And one of the things that you must remember, the proposal for the ECRL did not come in 2016 when you first heard of it. It was first endorsed in 2005. When the National Physical Plan was proposed, the National Physical Plan in 2005 already proposed a rail link from East Coast all the way to Port Klang. And this project was endorsed in the National Physical Plan 2 in 2010 and endorsed again in 2016. It was also endorsed in the National Public Transport Master Plan 2012. It was also identified as an important project in many of the structure plans. So when most of you hear about this project in 2016, the project was already approved and endorsed 10 years before that, right? So when you first hear about this, often decisions have already been made, right? So in the case of the ECRL, so when the alignment in principle was endorsed many, many years ago, it's from the East Coast to the Port Klang. But of course, now in 2016, when they start doing the more detailed design, they'll try to see how best the alignment can be optimized or redesigned to minimize the impacts to the environment, to the community, to the soils or other ecosystem, trying to balance between construction costs, because our money is limited. We don't have uninterrupted supply of money, so you only have certain budget. There's the issue of land costs. There are social issues and environmental social impact, which often are very different. Projects which have very little environmental impacts often have social impacts, and projects, if you avoid social impact, you could end up with a lot of environmental impacts. They have to look at connectivity, they have to look at alignment and the engineering geometry, and often they also have to balance with state government's development needs. So a project like this has multiple criteria in order to decide how it's finally designed, right? And EIA is one of the many processes. So, for example, this is something that I spent a lot of time, maybe 5 or 6 years on this project, looking at how best to design the alignment, how best to look at the design options, construction method, so that we try to keep the impacts as low as possible while enhancing the benefits. So this is part of the EIA. EIA, like I say, always repeat, it's not somebody standing in a corner writing a report about this project, but it's about working with the project team on the engineering design, on the alignment, on everything else to make sure the project is well designed, well planned, and optimized. So for example, let me just show you an example. So as part of the EIA, of course, we always try to protect forests as much as we can. So in the case of Terengganu, so for example, the green patches of forest, we avoid forests. So we try to shift the alignment towards the coast so that we can protect the forest. But as you know, as you go towards the coast, your land cost actually increases because it's more and more urban. As you go towards the interior, the land cost is cheaper. So by avoiding forests, you increase the project cost because the land here is very expensive. That's one example. So because you need to do a balancing, right? Or they say, oh, you don't have to acquire, you can put tunnels. But typically, if you build a railway like this at grade, the cost of putting elevated section is about 3 times this. And if you put tunnel, the cost is about 5 times. So you need to do all this balancing in order to arrive at a optimal design. Of course, if we had unlimited amount of money, we can tunnel the entire way, but unfortunately, we don't have. It's a good example of in an EIA, you need to balance also the needs of competing needs of other stakeholders. For example, I'm using the same example. So when you avoid forests, usually you end up in agriculture land, right? I remember this very clearly in 2017 or 18. We have actually redesigned the alignment in Terengganu to avoid most of the forests. And we were actually pretty happy about it because we realigned and redesigned so that we don't encroach into forest. We try to minimize, right? And we presented this effort to redesign to a big audience, and some people were happy, but we got serious comments from the Ministry of Agriculture, and we got bashed at the meeting saying that they say, you guys are crazy. You got so much forest, yet you enter into our agriculture land. We say, we'll never agree. You got forest, go into the forest. Nobody lives there. Leave our agriculture land alone, right? So you have competing stakeholders that you need to manage. So maybe most of you here, so your priority might be to protect forests, but there are also a bunch of stakeholders out there whose priority will be to protect important paddy land or agriculture land because of food security. So you need to balance those. So as part of the EIA for the ECRL, like I said, it's not about writing report, it's about trying to fine tune and improve the project design. So for this project, over the 4 or 5 years of project design or planning, the forest loss in the original design, designed by the engineers originally in 2016, we were going to lose about 2,000 hectares of forest. Through the forest surveys and the wildlife studies and through redesign of putting tunnels and wildlife crossings and so on, the project managed to reduce the forest loss from 2,000 to 450, later down to 357, and went through numerous iterations until the final loss was 2070. Still a big loss, but compared to 2000, there's a major reduction. And this is where EIA's important role comes in is to see how we can reduce the impacts of a project while trying to balance all the other factors. And the EIA is submitted based on the final design, not the original design. So when the project proponent submits the EIA, and then is the turn of the government to review. So the EIA report, now I'm talking about the report. Earlier I'm talking about the process. Now the report, because the government has only access to the report, because the government is not a party to the project planning. The report helps the government, it's a decision-making tool for the government. The report of the EIA should be provide sufficient information so that to demonstrate that the project conforms with this and so on, to enable government to make informed decisions. Right? So please remember to differentiate. The report which is submitted helps the government makes decision, and the EIA process itself, all the studies and assessments and the designs and the prediction are a tool to help the project proponent plan and design the project. Okay. So there are two parts to it. This part, the report, most of you get to see. And this first on the left is a part that most of you don't get to see unless you are part of a project planning team. So that's why there's a lot of misconception and misunderstanding that EIA is all about the report, because that's the only thing that you see, because most of us don't get to see the part on the left. So project proponent plans the project using EIA's project planning tool, and then once they are satisfied, they submit the report, and then government makes a decision about whether the EIA can be accepted or not. So, as I mentioned, EIA, the term is misleading. It implies that EIA is only about assessment, but in reality, EIA is more than just assessment. There's so many other things that needs to be done. And actually, the EIA guidelines make this clear. The objective of EIA is to aid on the planning of a project, to examine, look at the best options, to identify mitigation measures, to look at residual impacts, look at cost and benefit, and so on. Predicting impact is just one aspect. Somebody needs to stop the dog. Okay, thanks. Okay, if you ask me to summarize what an EIA is, an EIA in a nutshell, you assume a hypothetical conversation between the project proponent and the Department of Environment. When the project proponent submits an EIA report, what he or she is saying is basically this. So when they're submitting a report, basically the conversation is, hi DOE, this is our project, this is how it looks like. These are the benefits from my project to the society. These are the impacts we think that could arise from our project. And this is how we're going to tackle the impacts. We think our plan is sound, so please give us approval. So hypothetically, this is basically the conversation when the project proponent submits his or her EIA report to DOE. He is saying that this is my project, these are the impacts that I think could happen, and these are the steps that I'm going to take to mitigate those impacts. Please give me approval. And DOE says, your plan looks okay, I give you approval. Or DOE says, your plan is not convincing, I cannot give you approval. You may resubmit, go back and redo everything. Go back and redesign your project, right? And I think recently, many of you saw in the newspaper, I think, more than 60% EIA reports submitted last year not approved. This is from the state DOE Penang. 80% is quite low. More than half of the EIA reports submitted never get approved in the first round. They have to resubmit, redesign the project. Maybe the mitigation measures are not sufficient. Maybe the layout does not meet the buffer requirements. Maybe the project does not even meet legal requirements or is in conflict with local plan. So this is in a nutshell, right? In a nutshell, remember this, The EIA is a project planning tool to help the project proponent plan or design a project so that environmental issues and requirements relevant to the project are adequately addressed. The EIA report is really an environmental planning report for a project. So environmental planning report is a lot more accurate term rather than calling it EIA report, because EIA implies you only look at impacts, but whereas environmental planning looks at impacts, how you're going to solve the problem and so on. So remember, the EIA is a project planning tool for the project proponent. The second point is the report. The EIA report helps the government make an informed decision about the project. So in the report, there must be sufficient information of the options considered, of the impacts, of the mitigation proposals, of how we're going to monitor this, of the benefits and the costs and so on, so that government can make an informed decision. An EIA report is submitted in support of a project, right? And this is where most people often get it wrong, because just like your bomber submission, traffic layout planning, laporan cadangan pembangunan, bomber submission, every submission is the responsibility of the project proponent and is submitted in order to get approval for the project. So basically in EIA, what the project proponent is saying is, for this project, we have looked at all the environmental issues and we have designed our project in a way to reduce the impacts and so on. Please give us approval. So an EIA report is submitted in support of a project. So I think that is very clear. And the one line marked in red, the content of EIA report is the commitment of the project proponent. It's actually a legal commitment. Whatever is in the EIA report is binding on the project proponent. Project proponent says, these are my commitments. That means if I say I'm going to put all these design measures and I'm going to put all these mitigation solutions, it's already binding. It's their commitment. It's not just a consultant's recommendation. The content of the EIA report is binding on the project proponent, right? It's his commitment. Okay, so I'm sorry I took a long time to explain EIA because I think very important to understand the basis. Now I just move on to the next part. Has the EIA made a difference in the past 35 years? Okay, so some of you might be new to this. I've been following this for 35 years. So I think I have a relatively good idea of how things have evolved over 35 years. The answer will be, of course, yes. Otherwise, we would have wasted all our time and money. Projects today are definitely scrutinized better, are more transparent than they were 25 years ago or 10 years ago. Of course, now we think it's not transparent enough, but compared to 20, 30 years ago, where it was almost not transparent at all, we have made progress. Today, EIAs, the predictions are a lot more accurate, a lot more sophisticated, and the design solutions are a lot more specific than they were 20 years ago, right? If you look at this, as, for example, a picture of the MRT and the left is noise barriers. If this project was built 30 years ago, I don't think they have built noise barriers, right? And here they have spent hundreds of millions to build noise barriers. There's a lot more money going into environmental protection in a project than they were 20 years ago, right? Even the amount spent on assessments have increased substantially. When I started my career, people would not even spend 20,000 on EIA, but today spending 5 million, nobody blinks an eye, right? In terms of environmental protection, in 1988, when EIA was enforced, nobody really spent money on environmental protection. It's just a report that came in, nobody cared. But over the years, the amount of money spent on environmental protection projects have increased substantially. Like I said, most of you, because you're not involved in the first half of the EIA, you don't get to see this. But take my word that many projects are spending a lot of money, and investment in environmental protection in some projects that I worked on have exceeded 100 billion ringgit, right? So that's a lot of money. So the Rawang bypass is an example of project that spent, I think, several 100 million more just to protect certain species of trees. I mentioned the EIA. So all these are EIA that helps to improve the project design. Public participation has also increased substantially over the 35 years. And I think, we all complain that EIA is not participatory enough, but compared to all the other processes, how they plan traffic, how they do social impact assessment, how they do heritage, how they do bomber submission, how they plan a layout of a project, none of these are participatory. I think you need to imagine this, remember this, because EIA is participatory, it ends up getting more flag than it deserves. So one of the things that I've been pushing entire career is to get other agencies to also be participatory. Like, for example, when JKR plans for a road, I think JKR should be participatory, get public involved in how the road is planned and designed, and not pass the burden to the EIA, right? So sometimes, EIA, let's take the MRT or LRT. We get questions like, what's the price of the ticket for the MRT? How come it's not stated in the EIA report? Of course, EIA is environment, we don't cover the price of the ticket. But the problem is I can't blame people asking because there's simply no other platform for them to raise this question. So public participation in other agencies and ministries needs to be enhanced. So these are examples. And these are some of the improvements that done to the EIA process over the 35 years. And I think, not because I'm in this field, but I'm also familiar with what's happening in other fields. But the EIA process is one of those processes that have undergone a lot of improvements over the last 35 years. But despite all this, there are still a lot of weaknesses, and I'm sure all of you are also aware of this. We still see problems, and so some of the weaknesses in the current EIA process, despite all the improvement that has been done. So the EIA review process has been strengthened, but weaknesses remain. Public participation can be improved. The post-EIA enforcement can be improved. Capacity of stakeholders. Environmental issues are getting more and more complex. We simply don't have the capacity among government, among NGOs, among consultants. We lack capacity. Overuse of EIA, which I'll explain in a short while. We tend to overuse EIA. Every problem on the planet is blamed on the EIA. Why is there Ukraine war? Or they never do EIA. Why was the earthquake in Turkey? Because no EIA. So there's tendency to put every blame on the EIA, which is not true. And that is doing nobody any good because you divert attention on more important issues, right? So these are some of the weaknesses. I'll tell you the review process, how the EIAs are reviewed. We lack review expertise because issues are getting more complex. Very often government agencies do not have expertise to really review some very technical subject matters. Often there's focus on full stops and commas, not on the substance. Agency piggybacking. So what this means is, for example, other agencies often piggyback on EIA, bringing up their own issues. For example, Ministry of Health, just an example, Ministry of Education say, how come the schools got no toilet, not enough toilets? Actually, really not an EIA issue, but because they don't have any other platform, they tend to piggyback on the EIA. Too slow, too fast. Project proponents think the approval process is too slow. Government agencies think it's too fast. So there's always that fight going on, inconsistencies, and so on. So there's a lot of things in the review process that can be improved, although it's definitely better than how it was when I started my career. And it still has limited public input. I know some states and NGOs are invited to sit in the review panel, but that still can be improved. Policy conflicts. Okay, I think this is something very important. When we plan development and when we look at environmental issues, like I tell, there are national policies, there are state policies, there are project planning and project implementation. For example, there's the National Highway Network Development Plan, which is a national policy at the national level. that decides how many roads gets built over the next 20 years and where, which state, and so on. So that is at national level. So there might be a state road network plan, and then some JKR picks one road to be planned and built, right? So when the road is picked, we do EIA, and when the road is implemented, construction, we do EMP, monies, and all that. But at the higher level, at the policy level, at the program level, there's actually very little environmental input. There's very little public input done. As a result, a lot of the issues don't get picked up, and the problems then manifest at the project level. So I think if you are going to invest your time, especially NGOs in this audience, you might want to seriously consider focusing a lot more of your attention at the national policy level rather than at project. By the time it reaches a project level, it's often too late. This is the weakest link. For example, let me just give you an example of a road again. The National Highway Network Development Plan 2030 has already identified all the roads that need to be built between now and the next 20, 30 years. They are already identified. Yeah, of course, it has not gone down to the project yet, because maybe in RMK 30, they'll ask for budget, and then once they get the budget, they'll plan and design the road. But which road has already been identified at the national level. So if you scrutinize a document, that's the time you make the greatest impact at the policy level. If you think a particular road that has been proposed might have major issues, if you want that to be changed or what, it's best to be done at this level and not wait until at the EIA stage. For example, we have Rancangan Malaysia ke-12. It proposes 101 different things, but it does not say, yeah, we want to increase paddy production, but where are we going to get the land? Do we have to clear forest? It doesn't say. It only says increase paddy production. So we have a lot of weaknesses at the policy level where environmental issues are not looked at. For example, it says we need to boost aquaculture. And you all know aquaculture often is near mangroves. But it doesn't say, in order to boost aquaculture, which mangroves are we going to clear, right? So policies are very important. So similarly, many other things. So for example, we have Dasar Pembangunan Luar Bandar, which proposes many projects in rural areas. And you know, rural areas where most of forests are. And so it might be 5 years from now before that project is realized. And by the time planning starts, it's too late because a policy has already been made now. Next, I always say the overuse of EIAs. So there are many environmental planning tools that can be used to protect the environment. There's the strategic assessment, there is land use zoning, there is screening, you can mainstream policy, there are economic instruments, there is LCP, development control, EIA is one of them. There's a site suitability, you can have EMP, risk assessment, due diligence. There are many, many tools. Unfortunately, everybody only knows EIA and everybody harps on the EIA, which actually creates a problem. One, it diverts attention and puts a lot of burden on the EIA process. It underutilizes all the other probably more effective tools can be used to protect the environment. And it diverts important resources from where they are best suited. So there are many other tools. We need to see which tool can solve which project, and don't expect the EIA to solve all the problems on the planet, which is happening now, because people are not aware of the other tools. So for example, if in our land use zoning, when we do spatial planning, structure plan, if we plan our land use zoning well, if we do our siting well, so when the projects come to EIA, we can reduce most of the problems. But because sometimes it's not done well at the zoning stage, many of the problems then manifest at the EIA stage. Right? Public participation can be improved. Some of the problems is there's not enough engagement, often done very late, right stakeholders are not engaged, blah, blah, and so many other issues. But an important thing is there are also no other platform for public participation. And therefore, there's over-reliance on EIA. For me, ideally, if there's a road, JKR should organize the public participation. If it's a big landfill project, maybe Kementerian KPKT should host the public participation. Or if it's a big agriculture project, maybe Minister of Agriculture should be hosting the public participation, giving information to the public. But at the moment, all that is not done. Everybody leaves it to the EIA, and therefore it puts a lot of burden on the EIA process, which is actually not fair to DOE because they're picking up burden from other agencies and other processes which are not doing. So if you are going to push for something, push for transparency in other ministries and other departments so that we don't have to rely on the EIA alone. So I'll skip all this. Of course, post-EIA enforcement is important. EIA can be done well, but if there's no enforcement, you'll still have problems, okay? And capacity, as I mentioned, there's actually very limited capacity among most stakeholders, especially when environmental issues are getting more and more complicated. Whether it's government agencies or consultants or project proponents or NGOs, most organizations don't have the capacity of the issues that we are facing in the countries now, right? And it is a problem. How can we make it better? So I relate back to, actually there are hundreds of things that we can do. I won't go into the hundreds. First is, I'll just touch quickly on the 6. We need to strengthen policy framework. I told you a lot of the problems that we face at the EIA stage originate from poor policy planning. So as I mentioned, this is the biggest weakness. So when the government is planning, for example, all the structure plans, all the latest national policies or regional policies, and I think this is where, especially NGOs, this is where you should be putting a lot more time in scrutinizing proposal at the policy level. This is where the greatest impacts often happen, and this is where we have the greatest chance of influencing. So get involved in this process rather than wait at the EIA. Because if we get the policies wrong, all the problems will manifest at the project level and it comes out EIA. But if we can get our policies and plans correct with a lot more robust environmental input, then we can minimize the plan. So if you're going to put your effort, put it at the policy and planning stage. I think one of the things that DOE has done in recent years is under the Section 34A 4A, if a project is not consistent with a physical plan or statutory local plan or structure plan, DOE will not process the project, the EIA, which is, I think, is a good move. So focus on the policies and plans. Reduce dependence on EIA. Like I said, there are so many other tools. Please understand the other tools, and some tools are more effective than the others in solving or preventing a problem. Do not depend on the EIA alone. Like I said, at the moment, there is a great tendency to rely everything on the EIA. You cannot prevent the Ukraine war by focusing on the EIA. So EIA would not solve all your problems. There are other tools that can be utilized. And also we need to be clever because we have very limited resources in the government or everywhere else. And we need to be smart in this. For example, if you look at housing scheme, of course, housing scheme also have to do EIA, but most of the issues in a typical housing scheme, for example, soil erosion is an issue, is actually also being addressed under the earthwork bylaws and the ESCP, which JPS and the PBTs look at. There's issue of buffer, which Jabatan Perancang Bandar looks at. There's issue of traffic, which the local authorities and JKR look at. The issue of sewage, which IWK and JPP look at. So all these issues which are addressed in the EIA are already being tackled by other agencies. So we are duplicating our work. So therefore there's a need to rationalize whether an EIA is really needed, or should some of these simpler projects where issues are being tackled by other agencies, so that you can free DOE's time to focus on really critical projects and not every other project. Strengthening the EIA process, like I said, issues are getting complex. We need specialization. We need to focus on issues. government can actually engage experts, if necessary, pay them to help with the review process. So we can engage experts to review the report submitted by the project proponent, right? And it's being done in many parts of the world. Give a greater role for civil society. And I think, to be fair to DOE and EPD and REB, they've always involved NGOs compared to any other ministry in the approval processes, right? Consistency in decision, make approval conditions public, and so on. And also, I like to see some of the issues being given greater emphasis in the EIA review itself. Improve public participation. Of course, we can always improve. And I think maybe within the next month or so, I believe DOE will be making some important announcement on how public participation process will be further improved. So I don't want to preempt that, but maybe next month you will hear some of the major changes to the public participation process for the better. Make it more transparent. Enforcement needs to be tightened, as well as improve capacity of professionals. So I'm sorry I've taken up a lot of your time. So let me just recap this. First, the EIA is a project planning tool to help the project proponent plan or design the project so that environmental issues are addressed. The environmental report is really an environmental planning report. It's not just about impact assessment. It covers a variety of other things on how the project proponent has planned his or her project. And it becomes a tool to help government make informed decisions about the project. An EIA report is submitted in support of a project, similar to the laporan cadangan pembangunan, layout plans, engineering design submission, traffic report submission, bomber submission, etc. Right? So my last two slides, EIA has made a positive difference. If you look at over 35 years, right? Not fantastic, but I think it's still a very positive difference. However, gaps still remain, both within and outside the EIA system. Like I said, you can harp on the EIA until the cows come home, but if we do not address systemic issues in the policy level at other processes outside the EIA system, you will still end up with the same problems we have today. Some of the key issues that we need to work on: public participation must be improved, not only from the EIA perspective, but also we need to get other processes more transparent instead of just relying on the EIA alone. The review process needs to be strengthened, enforcement tightened, policy conflicts must be reduced. As I say, focus on the policies, make sure policy decision will not later on, 5 years down the line, create serious environmental issues. Active use of other tools, don't rely on the EIA only. And of course, we need to strengthen professional capacity amongst all stakeholders, not only government, not only consultant, but everyone. I think I've stopped here. Sorry, took up too much of your time, but I'm happy to take on questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bala. Very, very informative, very interesting presentation. There's been quite a lot, a number of questions posted on the chat. The first question is there anything in the law, from Wong Puyi, is there anything in the law that allows action to be taken against the project proponent if they were found to not have consulted people living in its immediate vicinity when preparing EIA and SIA?
Okay. Of course, I'm just talking from the EIA perspective. Of course, the law, Environmental Quality Act is pretty silent, but administratively, the guidelines say that project proponent must consult, must engage with the public, but it doesn't say how often, how many people, how to do it, and so on. So it's not in the law, but the guidelines say. But just for your information, again, this has not been released, but in the upcoming guidelines on EIA, it's a bit more explicit on how public participation should be done, what should be done, how it should be done, and so on. So if you ask me, is it the law says the Environmental Quality Act talks about it? At the moment, no. But administratively, the guidelines say yes. And DOE, when reviewing the EIA, could easily throw the report out if there's no evidence of public participation.
Going back, when is public participation introduced into the process? While the report is being prepared or after a project has been approved? This is from Hema, Greenpeace.
Okay, so in the ideal case, which I always preach, the project proponents, public participation should start as early as possible when the project proponent is planning the project, because you need to get public input so that you can plan your project better, right? So public participation is a continuous process from the project planning stage into design, right into EIA submission. And I believe that project participation is a continuous process for the entire life of the project.
So it's the entire life of the project, Dr. Bala.
Yes.
All right. So does the DOE get pressured to approve projects? This is from Theo from Pantera, Malaysia.
Okay, I cannot speak on behalf of DOE. So it'll be, I think, not fair for me to respond on behalf of DOE, but generally, Malaysia, most of Asian countries, we are always in a rush. We are always in a hurry. There's a lot of pressure for people to get their projects approved quickly. So therefore, it's not only DOE, every other agency, there's always a request to speed up approval. And not only from project proponents, but from ministers, politicians, and everybody else. There's always pressure on approving authority to speed up their work. So in fact, one of the things I think, those of you who follow World Bank, World Bank every year releases this ease of doing business that compares countries across the world. And actually Malaysia has done pretty well in terms of ease of doing business in Malaysia, in terms of getting financing, in terms of legal system and so on. But one of the items that we have always fallen short is time taken for approvals. And Malaysia's scoring is often pulled down by that factor. So I think from the government point of view, that there's also a concern.
Okay. I think further to the previous question, this is from your observation and experience. Do you think continuous public participation is being done in major projects in Malaysia? I think they're asking for your observation on this.
So I told you this is an ideal situation, should be done throughout. But what's happening in Malaysia is not continuous. Some projects do it better than the others. And I think one of the reasons is many project proponents are also, not only project proponents, even government departments are actually, they are not comfortable, they are not used to it, they don't have the skills or experience of having done it, and therefore they always try to avoid it. But if you compare to 20 years ago now, there's obviously a lot more public participation. But I think my experience is once they've done it once, twice, 3 times, then they become comfortable and they do it more. But many of them, if you're doing it for the first time, it's not easy to stand in front of 200 people and try to explain a project. So not many people have done it. They don't have the experience, and therefore they are reluctant to do it. But if you ask me, in the long term, the trend has been public participation has been improving, it's getting better. So we hope in the years to come, and especially with the new guidelines to be introduced soon, there'll be more public participation. But I also must reiterate what I said earlier. Don't just rely on the EIA. If you want to put pressure, you must make sure that other processes are there's also public participation.
Right. Okay. Next question, Dr. Bala. If public participation is key in the EIA process and reporting, and if your idea of an EIA is to reduce burden on DOE, What can we do about EIA relying on approvals from other plans, i.e. social impact assessment, traffic impact assessment? Are these reports meant to support the development planning, which is planning permission, where the requirement of EIA hinges on in the first place?
So, okay, I think let me clarify. I don't think I said about my idea EIA is to reduce the burden of the DOE. That's not my point. About EIA relying on approval from other plans, I still don't know. EIA approval is its own approval. Social impact has its own approval. These are all separate and parallel processes. So actually, maybe Emilia, you can perhaps ask, because whether it's EIA, social impact, planning submission, these are all parallel processes. The EIA can draw inputs, for example, from the social impact assessment, and vice versa. The social impact assessment can draw input from the EIA, but they remain parallel processes with separate submission processes and separate approvals. But they are free. They should actually get input from each other.
So, Amelia, if you want to rewrite your question, go ahead. I'll continue with the next question, Dr. Bala.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What are your thoughts on having the EIA prepared together with the TIA for the public prior to conducting the town hall, consulting the local standard of up to 3 kilometers for the mandatory SIA? So far, the project proponent does not have the EIA ready when the SIA is conducted.
Yeah, so I think that is maybe a weakness of our system now, that different processes are done at different paces. So ideally, in an ideal world, the public should have access to most project-related information. But in reality, they don't. And there's many reasons for it, because maybe the traffic, ideally they all should start concurrent, but often they start at different times. So what I'm trying to say is public has the right to have enough information. But in reality now, it's because of the way projects are planned, information might not be concurrent. The different processes are done at different times, and therefore public does not get access. But if you follow what I was trying to say, if public participation is taken as a continuous process throughout the life of the project, public can then get different information at different times, even if they don't get all on day one. But then there is a mandatory SIA. I'm not sure what that means. Yeah, of course, EIA is mandatory for some types of projects. But SIA reports are not public at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think they're saying about the mandatory SIA.
Okay.
Conducting the town hall prior to conducting the town hall, consulting the local standard up to 3 km for the mandatory SIA, Dr. Bala.
Okay, let me explain to you. So there are many methods of public participation, right, to get input from the public. Town hall is one method. You could do small workshops, you could do focus group discussion, you could do surveys, you could do one-to-one meeting. There are many different methods. And each method has its pros and cons, right? For example, town halls are good. You can bring 200 people together and brief them one shot. But often it's also not a democratic process, because very often 5 loud people dominate meetings. Focus group discussion or small workshops can bring, maybe you bring 10 people together at a time, so gives everybody a chance to talk. But it's a very tedious process. You might have to do 50 small workshop in order to get enough data. Of course, you can also do so. So there are many different methods, and town hall is just one method, right? So you need to use a combination of different methods depending on your target population, so that you get the right feedback.
Dr. Bala, what method is used to balance or assess the values of forests versus agricultural land versus coastal/marine, apart from monetary costs?
Okay, this is a very technical question. I don't have a good answer. But very often, we all rely on very scientific or numerical methods, which theoretically sounds fine, but in reality doesn't work. So sometimes I just give you an example just now, balancing between agriculture land and forest land. No matter what scientific method you use, you'll never get an answer that will satisfy everyone. So very often, getting all stakeholders together and negotiating a solution might be the best option. So yeah, so I don't want to do a scientific assessment just for the sake of doing it, because in reality, these are all often very subjective and we cannot really rely on the answer. So getting all stakeholders together, negotiating is a much better solution for me.
Okay.
Which is not easy, of course. Everybody wants their stuff. So
yeah, but some research would have to needs to be done beforehand, right?
Yes,
Before we call all the stakeholders.
Like, for example, let's go back to the forest and agriculture. So, of course, we have forests and we have forests, and the forests are different categories. If it's a very, 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 very important forest, maybe it's an important tiger habitat. So you can sort of put a higher weightage to it compared to somebody just planting a few bananas behind their houses. So there's certain things you can put a greater weightage, but they're also important agricultural land. For example, the Kemasin Semarak or the important paddy land, which is already earmarked as food granary tier 1 areas compared to a shrub, which might not be. So you can assign weightage to certain types of land based on their importance. But again, this will require negotiations with stakeholders.
Seeking doctors' comment on possibilities of having a macro EIA done during the rancangan tempatan daerah stage.
Okay, so let's not use the word macro. So at the rancangan tempatan or rancangan struktur stage, there's always somebody looking at environmental issues of the proposal. But the problem is that input is often very limited, right? So it's, for me, it's a very important process, the local plan and rancangan tempatan and rancangan struktur, where I would really like to see greater environmental input at that level. Instead of just asking somebody to spend a couple of weeks looking at the plan for the entire district, I think we need to see greater involvement of the environmental people and greater public participation at rancangan tempatan and rancangan struktur. At the moment, it's actually very, very limited. For such an important document, they do public display twice over the entire course, which I think is not sufficient.
Right. Dr. Bala, looking at the rancangan tempatan, you'll have the zoning, conservation zone, and the physical plan. You have the environmentally sensitive areas. And these are all, like you're saying, looking at policy documents. But then what happens is that even though the area has been identified as a conservation zone, you suddenly find projects that are adverse to the environment being proposed for that particular area.
Right.
How do you, so?
Yeah, so, so the problem lies in when policies and plans are done, they are usually not carefully thought through because they are done in a short period of time. There's not enough environmental and social inputs. There's not enough of public input at that stage. And therefore, a lot of things slips through the holes. So having said that, I think one important thing that DOE has implemented in the last 3 or 4 years is if the project does not comply with the structure of local plans, the EIA will not be processed. And I think this is an important step in making sure people comply with the structure plan and local plan. But then having said that, structure plan, local plan can also be amended. If the state governments want to amend it, they can do it. So nothing is sacred.
So there is a concern about adherence to the local and structure plans as well, the zoning that is undertaken under those, because changes can be made by the state government,
Sure.
correct?
Yep, definitely.
Okay. Under what circumstances can JAS impose the submission of the EIA report by the proponent?
Oh, I think the answer is straightforward.
Oh, sorry, sir. Sorry.
The
Go
law is
ahead.
quite clear, right? What projects you need EIA?
Yes. But I think one of the things is also, Dr. Bala, is also the EIA reports that require public scrutiny.
Okay.
And the availability of these reports when when you do not have the public scrutiny as well.
Okay. Now, okay, let me try to answer that. So at the moment, the DOE's processes is there are EIA two types, right? Schedule 1 projects and Schedule 2 projects. Schedule 2 EIAs, the reports are physically displayed. Right? So I think the ruling now is all reports should be available online. So, but of course, they have not implemented it consistently. But the understanding, if I believe the ruling is all EIA report should be available to the public. Only the Schedule 2 EIAs are also physically displayed.
Okay.
And this is also will change in the coming months, because I think we are going to introduce a bit more robust system for public display.
Yes, I think the problem has been for a lot of residents associations and CSOs is trying to get access to these EIA reports.
Correct.
And at the moment, we have to go to the library and write it by hand. We can't take photographs. And yeah, so while you may have access, the type of access as well.
Okay. No, so actually for any Schedule 2 EIA, I know this for sure, you should be able to download the report free. Every Schedule 2 EIA, you don't have to go to the library to copy it down. You can download the entire report for free.
Okay.
If you can't do it, then there's something wrong. Then you should complain to the DOE or what. But I know all Schedule 2 EIA, which are the critical projects, the full report is available to the public to download. Of course, long time ago, you had to go to the library, but that is not the case now.
Okay.
So if you can't access, then please, I think you tell DOE, I'm sure they get it done.
Okay. How about Schedule 1, Dr. Bala?
Schedule 1, my understanding is, I'll just check, that all this, also Schedule 1 should also be on DOE's website. That was a decision made long time ago. But of course, sometimes officers forget to upload and so on. But my understanding is the policy is all reports should be on their website. But you know how it is. Sometimes they forget to upload. Sometimes it's uploaded late and so on.
Okay. All right. So we'll look into it again and see whether that is available.
Yeah.
Next question. Looking at the prospect of the new Indonesian capital, Nusantara, on Borneo, how could EIA from Malaysia's side be engaged? Any involvement from Malaysia, East Malaysia?
I don't know. So of course, Indonesia is a sovereign nation. If they have to do EIA, they'll do it according to their terms and conditions, according to our legislation. They don't have to consult Malaysia. But of course, I suppose at international platform or even at the ASEAN level, they do discuss this sort of thing. But if you're talking about EIA, Indonesia is a sovereign nation. They are free to do the EIA according to their laws. We got no say in that.
Okay. All right. On Pan Borneo project, what is your opinion on this project in EIA aspects, process, and decisions?
I have no opinion because I have not been involved. I got no clue how it was done. So I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I actually thank Dr. Bala for sharing today, and actually his presentation shows the importance of right to information. And actually, today's session actually given me more actually ammunition to push for right to information with regard to public interest. It's not just EIA, but the whole machinery of the government has to be transparent. Anything public of interest with public interest should be in the public domain. It cannot be restricted. That is it is actually the challenge we are facing. When we don't have access to engagements, so we do not get the full picture. And also that the impact, as Dr. Bala mentioned, there are already the plans, like 25 years ahead, already there. But these are actually not being shared openly, and also we are, and the public also has not been actually aware of their actually role to understand these plans, which are actually far ahead, to be prepared to actually give feedback. And again, I always highlight the issue of Malaysia's commitment to maintain 50% forest cover, which was actually decided in 1989 during the Langkawi Declaration. And it is actually a commitment, and it's actually a long-term policy of the government, and we should actually demand accountability by all in the government. And another issue is that when those who are in regulatory position are not transparent of any conflict of interest positions. And it's important that even the politicians, the ministers, should not actually make any statements which actually sort of restricts the public servant, the civil service, to be independent. The ministers should not favor any businesses or industry, so that the civil servant can act independently. So, these are actually not really very enforceable laws, but these are principles to ensure accountability, transparency, and acting in good faith. Often, the acting in good faith is actually the basic principle for public office. It is not you have a right, you can decide arbitrarily. It is actually you are deciding with good faith for the interest of the public. Sorry, taking along.
Okay.
Taking over Dr. Bala's time, but actually all should understand, and also it's our role to actually encourage others, neighbors and friends, to participate in these processes, so that our nation building is actually fair to all. Yeah, thank you very much.
So, Shani, if I can just add, so as I say, the EIA being transparent for a long time, I think it goes back to in the early 2000 when DOA decided to, every time EIA is done, it must be public displays and all that. So over the last 20 years, they've made improvements, but that improvement has not happened across all the other sectors. So we all keep on flagging dead horse. That means we all keep on saying EIA not transparent, but I think people are missing the point. There's only so much you can do with the EIA. All the other processes, that 99 others, are completely not transparent. Yet people keep on flogging the EIA. So I think what we need to do is, how do you make JKR or Ministry of Energy or somebody others to introduce transparency and public disclosure for projects under their jurisdiction, right? So that we have more options.
So we need to start pushing it, like you said, the CSOs and maybe CBOs and other organizations. We need to start
Yeah.
pushing and
Right.
asking for that, right?
And also greater involvement of CSO at the policy and plan stage.
Right. And we should push for that. Right.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the questions that has been put in by Evelyn of Jedi. I agree with the need to strengthen our focus on policies. However, in the stakeholder consultation process in most policy deliberations, the roundtables involving NGOs are not easy to get invited to, i.e., it is not inclusive, where only a small number of NGOs that are usually given a seat at the table over and over again. It is also often opaque, as the draft documents are solid and therefore embargoed. How can this change?
Okay, this is a question basically targeted towards government, which I not supposed to answer.
Maybe some of your observations and input.
I suppose that I agree. One, we all can agree that process needs to be improved. There needs to be a better representation from NGOs and for more diversity, I guess. So, but you're right. Very often the same NGOs get invited. And I think one of the reasons is that, I mean, I'm not saying it's the right reason, but one of the reasons is many of these subject matters tend to be very specialized. And if you're not been there for a long time, you also cannot follow what's going on both at the national and international level. So some of the larger NGOs benefit of being larger. They have people who are specialized or committed to certain themes or topics, and they work on that for all their life. So they are a lot more knowledgeable, they are a lot more connected with the government processes, and therefore government, when inviting people, say, let's take climate change. When they invite people, NGOs for climate change, they tend to focus on people who have always been in climate for a long time. So that's why you get the same people being invited again and again. So you can't blame them. But how do we get more NGOs involved? I think, again, this is what NGOs have been very good at, that you lobby and you fight for this, that you need to be represented better. And I think it's also good, I suppose, that you also familiarize yourself with all the upcoming policies and all that. Sometimes by the time that roundtable are done, you only know about it a month later. So sometimes it's good for us also to keep abreast on what's happening. Even I'm with this field for so long, I often cannot keep abreast because there's simply too many things going on.
So there needs to be more communication, more sharing of information about what's going on, I would say.
Yes.
So that we keep abreast as well. So maybe that's something that the bigger NGO CSOs can do as well.
Right. See, for example, let me share with you what you can do. Let's take roads, for example. Often roads create controversy. So by the time they come to public's knowledge, it's often quite late, and they tend to be controversial. People, NGOs protest, make noise, and so on. But one of the things you can do is, let's focus on roads, that you need to start engaging with KKR, which is the Kementerian Kerja Raya, who's planned roads years ahead, and they plan at the national scale. And the roads that are to be built 10 years from now are already known. So if you, for example, if you do put in a bit more effort in engaging with KKR, for example, I think the chances of averting bad roads are greater. The chances of you getting invited for public consultation are greater. So I think you also need to target, because there's simply too many things going on in the country. So we also we don't have that much resources. Maybe you want to focus on certain key sectors which might have great impacts on environment, maybe transportation, energy, agriculture. These are three I can think of.
Yeah. A beach is actually initiating that. So we are seeking meetings and dialogues with these various departments. And then what we were planning to do is also invite other NGOs to join us in these meetings. So I think that way we can also not only introduce ourselves, but even the smaller CSOs. So the government departments are also more aware of who is out there and maybe invite them as well. So I agree with you, Dr. Bala. Sometimes we have to introduce ourselves to the government departments, right?
Something funny. About 5 years ago, we conducted a workshop for a particular government agency, and one of the topics that we presented to them was, who are the NGOs? No, from a government perspective, sometimes NGOs look very scary. They all make noise and protest all the time. So, and people in the government, because they are not familiar with all the different types of NGO, all of you are put in the same pigeonhole. These are NGOs and they make a lot of noise. Not realizing that there are many different types of NGOs, each have their own purpose and mission and so on. So sometimes we had to did the training to educate them on the different types of NGOs, how they operate, where they got the funding from, what are their objectives and so on, so that government departments are also familiar with how NGOs operate. At the moment, I think there is a big vacuum in their knowledge about NGOs and how NGOs operate.
Good. So I think we all have to start working together, not just depend on the government, but the NGOs also have to initiate as well, right, Dr. Bala?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, next question, just an observation from one of our participants, Noina Baharuddin. There's a question of the quality of recent draft local plans that were drafted or have been recently approved and in the process of being gazetted. There's not enough awareness and participations by stakeholders within the municipality. Land use zoning and its land use limitation is set there, and to be in accordance with the NPP and SSP. Do you want to add to it, Dr. Bala? I think there's also, if I could just add, there's also the, when you talk about the quality, one example, for example, Dr. Bala, is the use of 2D maps and not 3D maps to show the area that is, you know, the area in the local plans and all that. So there needs to be improvement in some of the information that is being shared and the quality of the information that's shared as well.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but I rather not comment because that's going out of my area.
Yes, okay, yeah.
That question should be posed to Plan Malaysia, but I agree that the local planning process can be improved, both in terms of getting public input as well as the amount of environment and social consideration given to the proposals within the local plans.
Yeah. And Geeta from Europe, Asia has taken into cognizance our overall project submitted for approval in Semenanjung 2 years ago. Information is that only about 10% is subjected to EIAs.
Right.
90% of projects go through other planning processes only. Yeah. Is that true, Dr. Bala?
Yeah. Because EIA is only subject to big projects, right? So there are a lot of small projects. You know, you build one kandang kambing, one bus stop, 2 houses. All this don't go through EIA. So vast majority of projects in Malaysia are small projects. So what Geeta says is correct.
Okay. I would ask more questions, but we have so many questions, so let me finish them first. Can you advise if important bird areas, IBAs, or key biodiversity areas, HCVs, or other non-government conservation classified areas are assessed against in the EIA process?
Okay, so I see the comment. This is from Stephen Page.
Stephen Page, yeah.
So all EIAs are supposed to assess again. Of course, DOE uses the terminology environmentally sensitive areas that will include HCV, IBA, whatnot, and so on. They should, but in reality, often not done well, because for a long time, biodiversity has never been the key focus of EIAs, right? Because for a long time, the EIA tend to focus on physical impacts on water pollution, air pollution, and so on. Only maybe in the last decade, where biodiversity is getting greater prominence, and I really hope in the years to come, it will become even more important. So to answer Stephen's question, yes, it should be assessed, but in reality, they're often not done very well. So in fact, if you remember my slides earlier, one of the things I said is in future that things that should be given more emphasis on EIA are climate change, biodiversity, disaster risk. These are three things.
Yes. So hopefully that will happen, Dr. Bala.
Yes, hopefully
Yeah.
that will happen.
Yeah. A question from Dr. Kam. When a major change is made to a project, example, change from at-grade road to tunneling, that has already got EIA approval, would it warrant a fresh EIA to be carried out? So when there's a major change.
Okay. So to answer Kam's question is yes. So of course, when you submit an EIA, that EIA is a project-specific submission. Is for that particular project, for that particular design, for that particular alignment, and so on. And when DOE gives approval, it gives approval for that specific design. So after getting approval, if you make changes, the question is, how big is your change? If you shift your road by half an inch, DOE would not even ask you anything, right? But let's, for example, you realign a road. Previously, it was going to the left. Now you shift it 1 kilometer to the right. A new EIA submission would be required, right? So the question is, what constitutes a major change? But it boils down to whether the impacts have substantially changed or not. So that is a judgment call that DOE makes. Very often, my experience is, if in their opinion, the design change is minor, they'll ask for additional information to be submitted. If they think it's a major change, they will ask for a new EIA. So there is no hard and fast rule with regards to this, but DOE makes that call.
So again, it depends on DOE.
And what is the change involved?
And how they determine the change as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because you said, like you said, they might determine it's a minor change or they might determine it's a major change.
Yep.
And then depending on that, they will decide what is needed, right?
Yep.
So, but how can you question that decision by DOE?
Of course, you can question any decision by anybody, whether you get an answer or not, it's another matter.
So that's another problem. So we might be able to question it, but whether we get an answer is a difference.
Yeah, because,
there's what I mean. There's no process to question that decision, right?
Yes. But I think, to be fair to DOE, in most cases, whenever the changes have been major, they've asked for a new EIA.
Okay.
But of course, sometimes I think I can understand. Sometimes it's just a very small change. You shift it by 2 meters or 1 meter, so that doesn't really count as a major change.
Okay. Next one. Who monitors the integrity of consultants who prepares the EIA reports? Reason being, these consultants are the ones conducting the studies, design or redesign of projects to minimize environment impact.
Okay. Let me answer. So this is a question that is not only relevant to Malaysia, but all over the world. All countries also struggle with this question. So because the problem is because environmental professionals, they don't come from a specific discipline. Like, lawyers, you have a law degree, you become a lawyer. Engineers, you have an engineering degree, you become an engineer. But the environmental professionals, they come from different disciplines. And therefore, many countries have struggled to regulate professionals, or who is qualified as a professional and who is not, right? So different countries have different approach. Some are regulated by the government, some leave it to professional bodies which are independent of the government to regulate. So in Malaysia, over the last 25 years, and I've been involved in some of this, there have been many attempts to form professional bodies or association for environmental professionals. Many years ago, NSearch initiated something, and then DOE introduced a registration scheme specifically for EIA consultant. Sabah and Sarawak also have a specific scheme for registration. But none of these are perfect, and they all have weaknesses in all of them. So the answer is, at the moment, it's not very well regulated. DOE has embarked on a process to establish a board of environmental professionals to govern the conduct of professionals. So that is still being studied. the Sabah state government has also embarked on a process to establish a Sabah Environmental Professionals Board, which is ongoing process. So we hope that in the coming months or years, something will get done.
Okay, so being more strict, and there is better measurement, right, and scrutiny.
Yep.
All right, but this is only Sabah.
Yeah. So sebenarnya federal and Sabah.
So how about Sarawak?
Sarawak has its own EIA registration scheme, so consultants need to. So this is regulated by the Natural Resources Environment Board. But the idea what DOE is trying to do and Sabah try to do is get a board which is independent of the department.
Okay.
Just like how doctors and engineers are regulated. No, engineers are regulated by the Board of Engineers, which is independent of JKR, or see that doctors are regulated by the MMC, Malaysian Medical Council, not by the Ministry of Health. So you need a professionals board which is independent of the ministries or department.
Okay. So I think going that way would be the right way in a way, because it's neutral, it's separate, right, from the DOE. All right. With climate change becoming a menace, example, increased severe floodings and international concern on deforestation, does the government amend policies or national development plans that seem to take almost 10 to 20 years to approve? Example, the case of mega dams. Do states/agencies take into account, despite the go-ahead done at the federal level? I assume climate change and all.
Okay, I think, yeah, so it's a tricky question. I think in terms of climate change, I think we are playing catch up. I think Malaysia playing catch up. So many of our old plans and policies were done without taking climate change into account properly. And many of the plans are now being revised to make sure we do incorporate adaptation into our plans, right? So the question of mega dams and what is third. So you must remember that at the end of the day, even though federal approves the project, because land is a federal matter, the state must also approve. If the states don't approve, the project still cannot go ahead. And I'm sure you all are aware of some projects where that's the case. So I am not sure if that was the question. Do government amend policies that takes 20 years to approve?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think policies are always revised, right? Is that the question, whether the policies are revised from time to time?
I think, Kamala, would you like to answer? Because I think because you asked the question.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, right? For example, you're just mentioning about a lot of these mega projects that the government does for socioeconomic development, and after they've approved it, like for example, now the government has just announced about the port in the new port that's coming up in Selangor. And then you have these new issues of climate change, which suddenly it's worsening.
Right.
So how does that affect? Because here you have project partners already into, let's get this thing going and let's start doing the project planning. So how fast, in your opinion, do governments work, should be working in the current scenario? Or does it even happen, with the bureaucracy and the system in place?
Yeah, so policy changes happen all the time, but they are not as frequent as you like. So it's not easy. Once you establish a policy, you also cannot be changing it every other week, right? So typically policies last for 10 to 15 years. So that is roughly the time period for most policies. But in between, from time to time, new projects are announced that are often never mentioned in the original policy. So sometimes policies are changed because of a single project. Sometimes policies are changed because the physical environment has changed. In the case of climate change, things have changed. So I think a good example would be the National Water Resources Policy, which was done in the 90s. Then they revised it in year 2000 because of this. And then because of climate change, they will revise it again because all the prediction done in the earlier days now given the extreme weather would have changed. So policies do change, but they don't change very often for a good reason. But I think in some cases where there are adequate justification for changing policies at the short notice, that would happen, but these are very rare. But back to your port in Selangor, I think you're referring to the Pulau Keri port. So Pulau Keri port is also not a new port. The idea for a Pulau Keri port has been there for the last 10 or 15 years. So it's not new. So I guess the port designers then, if the policy doesn't take into account climate change, the port designers then would have to do their own study and incorporate adaptation into when they design the port. So can't rely everything on national policies.
So going to that, Dr. Bala, I know when you come up with your policies and all that, there's a need for data to help develop your policies and all. How is this collection of data? How accurate is it? How up to date is it in Malaysia? Not even for the EIA and for any of the policies.
Data has always been problematic. We don't have good data. Even if we have data, they're scattered all over the place, under different custodians. So not an easy question to answer.
But are there attempts to improve on this?
Yeah. Previously, there were attempts by federal government to centralize all this data. But then to get all agencies and all stakeholders to play their part and contribute and make sure the share data has proven to be very difficult.
Yes,
not all stakeholders want to share data. Yeah,
and also then access to the besides the government stakeholders, do CSOs, CBOs, members of the public, can we get access to this information as well? That's, I think, another question.
Yeah. Not easy. Not easy.
Right. Development projects are major sources of carbon emission, from the procurement of raw materials, construction, and the life of the project in operation, and also waste. In the context of the climate crisis and the urgent need to reduce emissions, can the EIA expand its scope to include this, or will this remain a black box situation where we will never know the carbon emissions? Okay. This is from Evelyn T.
Yeah. So I think just now Geeta pointed out something, that 90% of development in the country are not subject to EIA because they are small. So only about 10% subject to EIA, right? So even if EIA captures carbon, you will not be capturing carbon from 90% of the other development, right? So, but having said that, I think there will be in the future, coming soon, that EIA projects need to estimate carbon emission from that particular project. But that will not address the climate data issue, because most of the other projects and other initiatives are not subject to EIA.
Right. But the EIA can be a start.
Can
help develop a template for the others, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. For stakeholder capacity building in terms of assessment tools, are there any credible places that we can consider?
This again from Kamal. For stakeholder assessment, there are any credible places we could consider? ChatGPT.
GPT.
No, I'm just kidding. ChatGPT.
Oh, ChatGPT. Okay.
Sorry, Kamala, I think the question, I can't give you an answer now, but there's plenty of tools on the website. I mean, you just have to Google them. So there are plenty of tools available.
I think we all also need to do a lot more sharing. Those who have, who have knowledge of these different tools, to start sharing with one another as well. And, has CSOs and researchers and universities and all, we need to also start sharing our data so that it's available for everyone as well. Because data doesn't just come from the government, it comes from anyone.
Correct.
Who has this, right. And then, okay, and I think that's it. When Oh, that's it, I think. Any more questions, anyone?
I hope not. We are well past our time.
Yes, I know. All right. Sorry, Encik Shani, do you have anything else that you would like to share with us after listening to all the questions and the feedback by Dr. Bala?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very, very informative session. I thank Dr. Bala. So it's actually our role as CSOs to promote, not only about EIA, but actually public policies in whatever sector. No, we are sort of just concentrating on environment, but actually we are neglecting democracy. No, that is actually the important thing, democracy. As Dr. Bala shared, we are focusing on EIA, whereas other agencies are also actually collecting information and also require the project proponent to submit documentation to justify their projects. But those are actually not being shared with the public, and this creates I always say inequity. We don't have the information, so we are hopping on one agency and we are actually missing out the accountability from the other agencies to ensure safety and again, Dr. Bala said, minimize the impact. Often, like logging and mining, we don't see any minimization impact. And loss and damage is borne by the society, especially those are actually along the waterways, and it becomes yearly happening, and they are not compensated adequately, whereas the project owners are actually earning profit they are actually cutting corners from mitigation measures, where probably it's not in the project management plans, especially like logging. And they are and the people are actually subsidizing these resources these are actually exported at below cost basis. And even like palm oil, as Dr. Bala mentioned, they cannot be actually demanding extending the area, whereas their productivity is actually almost like many of the players are actually, their productivity is like below 50% of the best player in the field. So this performance should also be monitored, so that we don't go on opening up land for plantation and mining. And that's why I always mention 50% forest cover, meaning any new proposal should go back to existing land, not into the forest land. Even mining, why not acquire the plantation land for mining? And for those actually are in the plantation, they should increase their productivity to compensate to the land lost for other activities. This discussion should be more in depth, and so that we understand we are not just talking about environment pollution, but also we have to contribute to the development models out there, so that we demand that whoever actually in these economic activities are also playing responsibly. This sustainable development is, become a hype, merely become a hype without actually we contributing complying to the principles of sustainable development. Thank you very much. Bye.
Leela and Shani, I think I also need to go. If you ask me to summarize everything, I just have 2 points that I want to stress, and I think mainly targeted to CSOs. One is, like I said, there are so many other processes besides the EIA. You should learn and focus some effort on that, because I think in terms of return, that'll be better, as opposed to just flogging almost a dead horse. You've been flogging the EIA for 20 years, so time to start flogging other horses. So that's one. Number two is get engaged, or at least get a foot into the policy planning process. And I think that is very important. Because by the time you reach EIA, it's often, like I say, it's often too late. So you need to get involved in the policy and plan stages.
Yes. Totally agree with you, Dr. Bala. A lot of good, really good sharing of ideas, and for me, a lot of new information. It's all about capacity building and building up your knowledge and understanding how we should go about to make sure that there is proper change and for the better. And also looking at, what's happening in the country now with climate change and deforestation, I think, and the need for standardization across Peninsula, Sarawak, and Sabah. We all need to start, I think, working together and, like you said, getting access to policy-making decisions, having data that will help also in our case to prove our case and everything. So thank you everyone for attending today's talk. We will actually be having a webinar on the EIA next month as a continuation of this. And we look forward to seeing all of you here, seeing all of you there next month. And a big thank you to Dr. Bala. You've always been someone who has believed in sharing knowledge and information, and we're very pleased that you came on board today. Thank you, Dr. Bala.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks.
And thank you everyone for coming and staying for more than 2 hours. Thank you. Bye.